Section 1. The world has rules. There is a particular kind of comfort that comes from a world with rules. Not the rules that people write down in contracts, not the kind that lawyers argue over or officials post on signs. The deeper kind. The kind that feel like gravity. The kind that, once you understand them, give every action in that world a weight and a consequence, and a logic that you can feel in your chest even when you are only half paying attention. The kind that make a fictional place feel real, not because it is described in enough detail, not because someone drew a map of it, but because you understand the forces operating inside it, the same way you understand that if you step off a ledge, you will fall. You do not think about this. It is just true. Avatar. The Last Airbender built one of those worlds. From the very first moment, water swirled around a young girl standing knee-deep in snow outside the ruins of her village. The show was quietly, patiently, without any announcement, laying down something that most fantasy worlds do not bother to establish. It was laying down the sensation of a system, not rules stated aloud by a character during an exposition speech to explain the plot to the audience. Rules embedded so deeply into the fabric of the animation and the music and the choreography and the very way bodies moved through space that you absorbed them through watching. You took them in the way you absorb a native language as a child, not through study but through immersion, through repetition, through the slow accumulation of 1,000 small examples that form a grammar inside you before you even have words for it. You did not need anyone to explain to you that earthbenders move differently from airbenders. You could feel it. The weight of the stances, the ground-shattering bluntness of a fist driving down into stone, the way the legs root and the body turns without yielding, compared to the circular gliding evasion of someone who has spent their entire life learning to be where a blow is not. You could feel the difference between the way a firebender's feet push off the earth and the way a waterbender's arms trace the arc of a tide. The rules were not told to you. They were shown to you, again and again, with the patience of a teacher who knows that real understanding does not come from being informed. It comes from recognizing something you already knew. And that is what makes what we are going to spend tonight exploring so quietly remarkable, because Avatar broke its own rules. Not carelessly, not sloppily, not in the way a tired writer might grab for a convenient solution and hope the audience is distracted enough to not notice. It broke them deliberately, thoughtfully, with the same obsessive attention to craft that it built them. Every single time this show found an exception to its own system, it treated that exception not as a loophole, but as a revelation. A place where the rules, when pressed against an extraordinary person or an extraordinary circumstance, gave way to something deeper and stranger and truer than the rules themselves. A place where the world revealed that it was larger than any description of it could contain. So, before we go anywhere, let us make sure we understand what those rules actually were, because you cannot appreciate a break without first understanding what was broken. Bending is the manipulation of one of 4 classical elements: water, earth, fire, air. Each of the 4 nations has its element. Each bender is born into their nation's element, and that element alone. And this is not just a geographic fact, not just a matter of where you grew up. It is something closer to identity at the cellular level. The philosophy of each element shapes not just the fighting style, but the entire way of life for the people who carry it. The way they build their homes, the way they structure their societies, the way they understand time and change and power and grief. This is not decoration. The show was careful, in ways that most people only half noticed while watching, to make sure the philosophy and the physicality of each element were inseparable. Waterbending is based on Tai Chi because water follows the path of least resistance. It flows around obstacles rather than through them. It redirects rather than opposes. When an enemy pushes, the waterbender does not push back with equal and opposite force. The waterbender steps aside, borrows the force, and sends it somewhere else. Katara's fighting style, across all 3 seasons, is built on this principle. She barely ever meets force with force. She catches, she redirects, she flows into the gaps her opponents leave behind. Earthbending is based on Hungar, because Earth stands its ground. It takes the impact. It plants itself in the soil and refuses to move unless it decides to. An earthbender's strength is in their stance, in the ground connection that runs from the soles of their feet through their legs into the body of the earth itself. They do not evade, they absorb. They wait for the right moment and then they strike with everything they have, direct and without apology. Bumi, king of Omashu, is the extreme version of this. The man is essentially a rock with opinions. Firebending is Northern Shaolin because fire is aggressive and expansive and always reaching outward. It is always pushing, always consuming, always seeking more space. A firebender's strength is in the extension, in the reach of the arm, in the momentum built through stepping forward rather than retreating. The strikes are long and powerful and come in combinations, because fire does not produce a single flame and stop. It spreads. Airbending draws from Baguazhang because air is evasion. It is circulation. It is the art of never being exactly where your opponent expects you to be. Aang's fighting style in the early episodes is almost entirely defensive, not because he is weak, but because evasion done with this level of mastery becomes a form of offense. If no blow ever lands, the opponent exhausts themselves. Air waits, air moves, air finds the path between. These are not just style choices that some animation director made for aesthetic reasons. They are the grammar of this world. The sentence structure of every fight you watch tells you something true about the elements and the people who wield them. And the whole system holds together with such internal consistency that you feel it working on you even if you never consciously identify it. You watch Aang and Katara fight back to back, and they complement each other in a way that feels right. You watch Toph and Aang train and they clash in a way that also feels right. The evasive meeting the immovable. The grammar is operating. You are reading it without knowing you are reading it. And above all the specific rules about how each element works, there was one more rule, the foundational one, the bedrock on which everything else was built. Each bender bends their element. A waterbender bends water. Not earth. Not fire. The boundary between elements was not just a training limitation. It was the premise of the world. It was the reason the Avatar existed. Because only the Avatar could cross those lines. Only one person per cycle, born into one nation, carried all four within them simultaneously. The Avatar was the exception to the rule of separation, the cosmic argument that the elements were meant to be in balance rather than division, the walking proof that the walls between fire and water and earth and air were not natural laws but inherited positions. That was the deal. That was the whole architecture. And the show, across 3 seasons of 61 episodes, kept finding ways to break it. Each time, the break was earned through character and consequence. Each time, it meant something beyond the mechanics. Each time, it opened a door into a corner of the world's mythology that the rules, by themselves, would never have allowed you to see. Tonight we are going to walk through every one of those doors. Slowly, without rushing, with the kind of attention that this show was built to reward. You do not need to be watching a screen. You do not need to be particularly awake. Close your eyes if you like. Let the words come in at whatever pace feels comfortable. Let the images form on their own behind your eyelids. The blue fire and the puppet master and the girl in the metal cage who felt the earth inside the walls. The ancient creature with a forest on its back. The boy who died and came back changed. The man who borrowed a philosophy from another element and survived lightning because of it. We have a long, quiet road ahead of us. The world of Avatar has never been in a hurry, neither are we. It starts, as so many things in this show start, with something that seems small and then turns out to be everything. It starts with the color of fire. Before we go further, drop me a comment right now with where you are in the world and what time it is where you are sitting or lying. I love seeing the replies come in from every corner. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do. It costs nothing and it genuinely keeps this channel going. Section 2. The fire that should not exist. Azula's blue flames. Fire, in the world of Avatar, is orange. The show never announces this. It does not need to. From the very first moment a firebender produces a flame on screen. From the first curl of orange heat rising off a soldier's raised fist. From the first red glow of a Fire Nation warship cutting through dark water in the opening narration. The color is established the way all the best world-building details get established. Not through exposition, through repetition. The orange appears again and again until it becomes invisible. You stop seeing it as a choice because it has become the background, the default, the thing fire simply looks like in this world. It is as unremarkable as the fact that stone is gray. And then the final minutes of Book 1 play out. The Northern Water Tribe battle is ending. The siege is over. And out of the shadows of a descending war balloon steps a girl who is 14 years old, with her hair pulled back in a precise knot and posture that belongs to someone who has spent their entire life being told they were extraordinary and who has decided to believe every word of it. She looks at the world with the calm assessment of a person who has never once encountered a situation she did not feel capable of handling. And the fire she produces is blue. Not slightly blue. Not blue at the edges in a way that could be explained away as a lighting effect or an artistic choice about a particular scene's mood. Pure, clean, certain blue. The blue of a flame that has burned so completely that nothing impure remains. The blue of absolute combustion. The moment Azula steps into the show is the moment one of its quietest but most foundational visual rules gets broken. And the show does it with such confidence, such deliberate precision, that you are past processing the color and already busy being frightened of her before you have time to register that something has changed. So let us sit with this. Let us understand what blue fire actually means in this world, what the science behind it suggests, and why it tells you more about who Azula is than any conversation she ever has with another character. The real-world physics are worth understanding here, because the show was not making up the distinction. Fire produces different colors based on two things: its temperature and how completely the fuel burns. When fuel burns incompletely, when not all the combustible material gets consumed, the leftover particles glow in the warm range of the spectrum: red, orange, yellow. These are the colors of partial combustion. They are beautiful. They are also, in a precise thermodynamic sense, wasteful. The glow you see in those colors is the light of material that was not fully used. When combustion is complete, when every molecule of fuel is consumed entirely and no particles are left over, what remains is the pure emission from the superheated gas itself. The molecules are moving so fast, at such high temperatures, that the light they produce shifts toward the shorter wavelengths. Blue, and slightly beyond blue, at the highest temperatures, violet. The color changes with the temperature and the completeness. Blue fire is not hotter in some vague artistic sense. It is hotter in a literal, measurable sense. A truly blue flame requires temperatures far beyond what orange fire achieves. Nothing is wasted in it. Everything burns. The show's co-creator, Michael Dante DiMartino, explained in the art book for the series that they gave Azula blue fire initially for a practical animation reason. They knew there was going to be a fight between her and Zuko in the finale. Two firebenders throwing orange flame at each other in a close-quarters battle is a visual mess. You cannot tell whose fire is whose. Orange on orange, competing for the same space in the frame, blurs into chaos. But blue and orange, those resolve instantly in the eye. At any distance, in any lighting, on any screen, you know which sibling you are looking at. So, the blue fire started as a solution to a composition problem. But the show, being the show it is, did not stop at a visual distinction. It built a reason. It embedded the blue fire so deeply into Azula's character architecture that by the time you understand both the technique and the person, the color stops being a design choice and starts feeling inevitable. Of course, her fire is blue. There is no other color it could be. Here is what you need to understand about Azula. She has spent her entire life being perfect, not striving to be perfect, not working toward it as a goal, not measuring herself against a standard and finding herself mostly adequate. She has been perfect in the way that some exceptional people are perfect, without visible effort, without apparent struggle, and she has been rewarded for it so consistently and so completely that the reward and the identity have become indistinguishable. Being told she was extraordinary was not an experience she received and evaluated. It was air she breathed. It shaped her nervous system before she could name it. Her firebending reflects this. Consider what the show tells you about how firebending works. Unlike every other bending art, firebending does not manipulate an existing source of the element. Waterbenders need water present. Earthbenders need earth. Airbenders need air. But firebenders create fire from their own chi, from the internal energy of their body, produced through breath and intention, and the precise movement of limbs. Fire is not something firebenders find in the world. It is something they produce from themselves. Which means that Azula's fire is, in a very real sense, a direct expression of Azula. The flame does not come from outside her, it comes from inside. It is the outward translation of her internal state, made visible in light and heat. And what is inside Azula? Complete combustion. There is no waste in her interior architecture, no sentiment left over that she did not choose to keep, no warmth that has not been assigned a function, no grief or longing or vulnerability allowed to persist undestructed in the space behind her face. She has burned everything that was not useful. She is efficient at the deepest level, the level where fire begins. A flashback in an episode called Zuko Alone, which takes place years before the main story of the show, gives us young Azula throwing orange fire. She was not always blue. The change happened gradually, across years of training and refinement, and the slow elimination of everything impure from her inner life. She did not start perfect and stay perfect. She became perfect through a process that the show mostly does not show us, but that the change in her fire's color documents silently. The orange burned away as she burned away everything in herself that would have produced it. The blue is what was left. This is the grammar of her fire, the sentence it is writing across every scene she appears in. Other firebenders make orange fire not because they are lesser or weaker, but because they are human. Because they carry grief and guilt and love and frustration and all the other impurities of a person who has not stripped themselves down to pure function. Orange fire is what happens when a complete human being, with everything that entails, produces flame. It is the trace of the person left in the element. Azula's blue fire is the trace of someone who has worked very hard to be something other than a complete human being. Something more refined, something more dangerous, something that burns clean. And then the finale. Then the Agni Kai between them. The one the show has been building toward since Azula arrived at the end of Book 1 with that pristine, terrible blue flame. And something is wrong. The blue is not steady. The shapes are off. The edges of the fire are jagged in a way that Azula's fire has never been jagged before. It flickers back toward orange in moments, brief and unmistakable, as though the blue is failing. Azula's sanity is failing, and her fire tells you before her face does. If blue fire is complete combustion, if it is the expression of a person who has burned away every impurity, then what does it mean when the blue starts to come apart? It means the combustion is becoming incomplete. It means something is reasserting itself inside her. The grief she never processed about her mother. The terror she has always pushed below the surface about whether anyone in her life ever truly loved her rather than feared her. The specific, grinding horror of watching the two people she had always dominated, Mai and Ty Lee, choose someone other than her in the boiling rock. All of it, in the weeks before the finale, comes flooding back. And as it does, the blue becomes uncertain. The fire is still telling the truth about who she is. It is just that who she is has changed in a way she cannot control and cannot accept and has no tools to address, because the only tool Azula ever developed for her own interior was the tool of suppression and refinement and making herself more perfect. And that tool does not work on grief. It makes it worse. The rule break is not just that one character has blue fire while everyone else has orange fire. That would be interesting enough. The rule break is that the show used a violation of its own visual grammar to build a complete psychological portrait of a character across 3 seasons, and to deliver the climax of that portrait not through dialogue or confrontation, but through the color of the flame she could no longer keep clean. Blue fire is not a contradiction in the world of Avatar. Once you understand it, it is the most truthful thing in the show. The truth that Azula spent her whole life telling everyone, including herself, about who she was. And the truth that she could not tell, in the end, because the fire would not hold the lie. Section 3, Blood is not water. The horror of bloodbending. You have to understand what water is in this world before you can understand what Hama discovered. Water is the element of change. The show tells you this, but more importantly, it demonstrates it through every waterbender you watch across 3 seasons. Katara can shift between offense and healing mid-fight in a way that no other elements practitioners can shift. The waterbenders of the Northern Tribe carve their entire civilization from ice and live inside the frozen, flowing forms of their element. The foggy Swamp Tribe in the middle of the Earth Kingdom, which we will get back to, bends the moisture inside living vines, making plant matter ripple and strike like living arms. Water finds the space that needs filling. Water is never quite the same from one moment to the next. Water is the element of change because change is what water does. And water is life. This is not just a poetic statement in this world, it is a cosmological fact. The moon and the ocean, the 2 most ancient and primal forces associated with water in the show's mythology, are living spirits. Tui and La, black and white fish circling each other in the sacred spirit oasis at the North Pole, have been doing this dance for longer than human memory reaches. When Zhao kills the moon spirit, every waterbender on the planet loses their power simultaneously. The element does not exist independent of its spiritual foundation. Water and life are woven together at the deepest level of the world's design. The human body is mostly water. The blood that moves through the veins is water, structured and protein-rich, and pushed through the body's network by the heart's insistent mechanical rhythm. Every cell in the body contains water. Every breath carries water vapor. The living body is a system of water in motion, organized by an architecture of chemistry and pressure and the continuous work of the heart. Hama was a waterbender from the Southern Water Tribe. She was one of the women taken during the Fire Nation's long campaign of raids against the Southern Tribe, raids designed specifically and deliberately to eliminate Southern waterbenders. The Fire Nation understood, after a century of war, exactly how to neutralize a threat. You took the threat away, you put it in a cage where it could not function. The cage they built for Hama and the other captured waterbenders was sophisticated in its cruelty. No water, not a cup, not a dish, not a puddle from rain allowed to stand. The Fire Nation understood enough about waterbending to know that without water nearby, a waterbender was essentially powerless. Take away the element, take away the bender. The strategy was systematic, the raids were systematic. Over decades, they stripped the Southern Water Tribe of every waterbender it had, leaving behind only Katara, the last one, too young during the final raid to be taken. Hama was alone in her cell for a very long time. The show does not specify exactly how long. Long enough. Long enough for something very particular to happen to her understanding of what she was. She began to think about water not as a thing in the world, but as a principle. Not as the substance in rivers and clouds and oceans, but as the property of flowing, of movement, of being the connective tissue of living things. She sat in her cell and thought about where water goes. She thought about the animals that shared her prison, the rats that moved through the dark, and she realized something that, in the show's lore, no waterbender before her had apparently thought through to its conclusion. Water does not stop at the surface of the skin. It is inside. It is the blood and the fluid and the moisture in the tissues. It is the substance that life is built from at the cellular level. Wherever there is life, there is water. And Hama was a waterbender. Water was her element. She could feel it, not in the way a non-bender might feel the wetness of rain, but in the deeper way that bending operates, as a connection, as a living relationship between herself and the element. She could feel the water inside the rats. She practiced on them, night after night during the full moon, because the full moon is when waterbending is at its most powerful. The connection between the element and its spiritual patron Tui, the moon spirit, is at its peak. The sensitivity is highest. The reach is furthest. She worked with the rats until she could move the water inside them, until she could, in effect, operate them. And then one night she bent the blood of the guards and walked out of the prison that had held her for years. What Hama discovered is, in its pure form, a logical extension of waterbending. It does not break the rule that a waterbender bends water. There is water inside a living body. Therefore, a waterbender of sufficient sensitivity and power can bend it. The rule holds. The element is the same. The container is different. The container is alive and conscious, and is a person with their own will and their own experience of being in their body. But the element inside that container is still water. The horror is not in the rule break. The horror is in what the rule allows. Bloodbending has exactly one application. It has one purpose and one result. It takes control of a living body against the will of the person inside that body. It turns a person into something operated from outside. The show uses the word puppet. The technique is introduced in an episode called The Puppet Master. This is not subtle. The metaphor is not hidden. When Hama bloodbends the villagers in the climax of that episode, the bodies move in the distinctive, jerky, over-articulated way of a person being controlled rather than moving themselves. The natural fluency of a body inhabited by its own consciousness is gone. What is left is a body controlled by someone else's intention. Bloodbending is the only bending technique in the show that is considered, by scholars who have written about it seriously, to be intrinsically evil. Other techniques can be misused. Earthbending can bury someone alive. Firebending can burn down a village. Katara's ice discs can kill. But all of these are neutral techniques applied with bad intention. The techniques themselves have many uses, most of them constructive or neutral. The intention is what makes them harmful. Bloodbending has no constructive use. It cannot build anything. It cannot heal anything, at least not in the way the show presents it. It can only control. The technique is, at its core, a denial of the controlled person's autonomy. It says, with the bender's hands and the bender's intention, your body does not belong to you right now. It belongs to me. I am reaching into you and taking what I want. Academic philosophers who wrote about the show in a volume called Avatar, The Last Airbender and Philosophy, spent serious pages on the ethics of bloodbending. The question they asked was whether the technique was evil in itself or only evil in how it was used. They came to something like a consensus that bloodbending is different from other techniques in a morally significant way, because the loss of bodily autonomy it causes is a violation that no constructive application can offset. The technique and the harm are inseparable. The show is careful not to let you dismiss Hama as simply monstrous. It gives you her history. The Fire Nation took everything from her. They took her people, her freedom, her years, her identity as a waterbender. They put her in a cage designed specifically to break her connection to her element. And she refused to be broken. She adapted, she innovated, she found a way through. The invention of bloodbending was an act of survival, not of cruelty. The cruelty came later. When the survival became a weapon, she turned on people who had nothing to do with what was done to her. The tragedy of Hama is that survival and corruption were simultaneous. The same process that got her out of the cell also made her into someone who would trap innocent people in her own version of prison. The show holds both of these things at the same time without resolving them, which is one of the things that makes the Puppet Master episode so disturbing and so memorable. Katara learns bloodbending in that episode. She learns it quickly, with a disturbing natural ease. This is the show telling you something about Katara's power as a waterbender that it never quite says directly. She picks up in one night of desperate necessity a technique that Hama spent years developing in isolation. Her facility with it says something about the depth of her connection to water, about how far her sensitivity reaches, and it costs her something. Both times she uses it, in The Puppet Master and again in a Book 3 episode involving her mother's killer, she is quieter afterward. There is a heaviness in her that was not there before. The technique works. The technique leaves a mark. After the war, Katara and Aang outlaw bloodbending. Teaching it is a crime. Practicing it is a crime. The technique that Hama invented as an act of survival becomes one of the first things the new peacetime world decides it cannot tolerate. But it could not be uninvented. Knowledge, once in the world, propagates. Yakon, a crime lord in the young Republic city, could bloodbend without the full moon's influence. He could hold an entire city in his grip through it, controlling judges and officials without ever being seen to move. His sons inherited and extended the capability. Aemon could use it to permanently sever the chi pathways through which bending flows, a refinement so extreme that it began to approach energy bending from the other direction, reaching into the body not to control it, but to alter it at a deep structural level. All of it flows from one night in a prison, from one woman thinking about water in a way that everyone before her had apparently failed or refused to think about it. The rule that bloodbending breaks is the assumption that the water a waterbender bends exists separately from the living things in the world. That bending is a relationship between the bender and the environment, not between the bender and other people's bodies. That assumption was not wrong exactly. It was just incomplete. It left out the part where the most intimate and most terrible expression of waterbending is waterbending turned inward, turned toward the life that water sustains. Water is life. That was always true. Hama understood, in the dark of her cell, that life is therefore water. And water bends. Section 4. Lightning from the body, Iroh's stolen technique. Here's a rule the show states clearly, which makes the breaking of it even more interesting. Lightning generation, in firebending, requires a complete absence of inner conflict. The show explains this directly when Iroh tries to teach it to Zuko. Lightning, Iroh explains, is produced by separating the yin and yang aspects of one's chi, pulling them apart into two distinct streams, and then allowing them to come back together. When they reconnect, the energy release is massive and travels in a straight line between the separation point and the reconnection. The technique is not about power exactly. It is about clarity. About having an interior landscape that is organized enough to divide and then reunite without turbulence. Ozai can generate lightning because he feels only what he has decided to feel, and what he has decided to feel serves his purpose at all times. He has organized himself into a will, Nothing that he has not consciously chosen to believe or want or intend exists inside him in a form that might create interference. He is, in the specific sense this technique requires, undivided. Azula can generate lightning because she has made herself into a system, a human being who has rationalized and controlled every aspect of her inner life until the whole thing runs with the efficiency of a machine. A machine, if it is working properly, has no internal contradictions. The yin and yang of her chi can be divided cleanly because she has divided everything cleanly. She is a prodigy of control. Zuko cannot generate lightning because he is a war inside himself. He is his father's voice and his mother's memory and his own stubborn, buried goodness in a three-way struggle that never fully resolves. He tries, in the episode where Iroh teaches him, and the energy goes wrong. The chi will not divide cleanly because Zuko will not divide cleanly. There is no clean line between who he wants to be and who he was told to be. You cannot root lightning through a contradiction. The show tells you this rule plainly. Lightning generation requires emotional clarity. What Iroh did was refuse to need it. After the death of his son Lu Ten during the siege of Ba Sing Se, after his brother Ozai took the throne that should have been his, Iroh stepped away from the path he had been on. Not dramatically, not through any single decision, but gradually, through the slow work of grief and reflection and travel. He went out into the world and he watched. He studied martial arts from all the nations. He spent time with people from the water tribes and noticed how they moved. And in watching waterbenders, he saw something that his entire training as a firebender had pointed him in exactly the opposite direction from noticing. Waterbending does not resist force. It receives it, turns it, and sends it somewhere else. This is the foundational principle of Tai Chi, the martial art on which waterbending is based. When force comes toward you, you do not oppose it with equal and opposing force. You step slightly to the side. You use your hands and arms not as a wall but as a channel. The force flows through the interaction and continues on in a direction you have chosen. You are not fighting the energy. You are redirecting it. Iroh looked at lightning, which is a massive and chaotic release of electrical energy seeking the path of least resistance through the air, and he asked a question that no other firebender appears to have asked. What if, instead of trying to stop it or oppose it or generate it from scratch, he just received it? What if he stepped aside, let it in through one arm, guided it through the center of his body, and sent it back out through the other arm? What Iroh invented is not quite firebending and not quite waterbending. It is something that borrows philosophy from one element while being executed by a practitioner of another. He used the grammar of water inside the language of fire. He took the redirecting principle that waterbenders use to handle an opponent's force and applied it to the most extreme force in the firebending toolkit. The technique works like this. The lightning enters through one hand. It travels up the arm, through the stomach, the body's center, and exits through the other arm and hand. The path it follows inside the body is the same path a waterbender would describe, tracing the flow of redirected energy through their own body during a Tai Chi form. The stomach is the center point, the place where the energy pauses between entry and exit, where the bender has control over what direction it leaves in. The animators embedded this in the choreography visually. When Iroh or Zuko performs lightning redirection, the movement changes style mid-technique in a way that is detectable if you know what you are looking for. The absorbing arm and the initial receiving stance are waterbending movements drawn from Tai Chi forms. The exit and the firebending stance return in the final phase. The two philosophies merge visibly in the body of the person performing the technique, and they produce something that neither philosophy could produce alone. This matters beyond the mechanics. What Iroh found is an argument that runs quietly through all 3 seasons of the show. The argument is that the walls between the elements are not natural laws. They are inherited assumptions. They are positions that each nation arrived at through generations of teaching a particular way of being with their element, and that teaching gradually became invisible, became simply true, became the ground on which all subsequent thought stood. Nobody told earthbenders they could not bend sand by flowing it through their hands. They just never tried it the way the desert tribes learned to try it. Nobody told anyone that a firebender could route lightning through their body by borrowing from the other side's philosophy. It simply had not been thought of, or, if it had been thought of, it had been dismissed as wrong in principle before it could be tried. Iroh thought of it because he had stopped being invested in being a particular kind of firebender. After the death of his son, after stepping away from the path of conquest and power, after spending years in the world watching everything rather than just the things that confirmed what he already knew, he had room in his understanding for something new. He had become, in a quiet way, more like the Avatar than like a Fire Nation general. Not because he could bend multiple elements, but because he could learn from all of them. Because he treated the wisdom of each nation as applicable rather than foreign. Zuko eventually learns the technique. It takes him an entire season to achieve what Iroh describes, not because the physical technique is that difficult, but because Zuko has to become someone different first. He has to get enough of the way through his arc, enough of the way toward understanding who he actually is and what he is actually willing to do, that he can receive something lethal without flinching. He has to trust himself completely in the moment of contact. The scene in the finale, in the Agni Kai between Zuko and Azula, is the proof of this. Azula, losing her grip on herself and her fire, fires a bolt of lightning at Katara instead of Zuko. She is trying to kill someone he loves to break him. And Zuko steps between them. He takes the lightning. He redirects it. The voltage burns through him with enough intensity to send him unconscious and leave him near death. And yet he does not die because the redirection worked. Not perfectly, not without cost. But it worked. And the reason it worked is not that Zuko had achieved the emotional clarity that lightning generation requires. He had not. He would never have that kind of interior stillness. What he had instead was something different and in its own way more demanding. The knowledge of who he was and what he was willing to sacrifice for it. Not clarity, certainty. The certainty of a person who has decided, finally, at the deepest level, what matters to him. The rule that lightning requires emotional clarity is not wrong, but Iroh found a way around it that substituted a different kind of inner quality. Not the emptiness of Ozai or the controlled precision of Azula. Something closer to the waterbender's principle. The willingness to not resist what is coming. The willingness to receive it. The acceptance of the force. Iroh's stolen technique is one of the most beautiful examples of the show's deepest philosophical argument. The argument is that the elements, taken to their fullest philosophical expression, are not opposites. They are different angles on the same truth. The truth that force flows, that it can be redirected rather than opposed, that working with rather than against what is coming is not weakness but a form of mastery that is rarer and more difficult than the aggressive kind. A firebender who understood waterbending philosophy invented a way to survive lightning. The rule about elements being separate was not broken. Something deeper and more interesting happened. The rules of the elements turned out to share a foundation. And Iroh found it. Section 5. The Earth that Moves in Darkness. Toph's metal bending. The rule, in the Avatar world, was absolute. Metal cannot be bent by earthbenders. This was not a guideline, not a suggestion, not a limitation that the particularly strong or particularly skilled might overcome with enough effort. It was understood by every earthbender, across every generation, as simply and obviously true. Metal is not earth. Earth is stone, soil, minerals in their natural geological state, the raw material of the planet in the form that the planet produces. Metal is what happens when you take ore out of the earth and apply sustained heat to it, when you drive out the impurities and reduce it to its refined form, when you make it into something that does not exist anywhere in nature without human intervention. You have changed it. You have removed from it the qualities that make it earth-bendable. You have processed the connection out of it. No earthbender had ever bent metal. Not in recorded history. Not in the long tradition of the discipline that traced its origins to the badger moles, the original earthbenders from whom every human practitioner descended. Metal was on the wrong side of the line. And then Toph Beifong was captured and put into a metal cage. Let us be precise about who Toph is, because her specific nature is what makes this moment possible rather than impossible. She is 12 years old. She is the daughter of a wealthy family in the Earth Kingdom who have spent her entire life treating her blindness as a tragedy to be managed and hidden, as evidence that she needed protection from the world. She has spent years behind those walls developing into someone entirely different from what her parents imagined her to be. She found the badger moles in a cave near her home when she was very young. She learned from them, not from human teachers, not from the standardized instruction that every other earthbender in the world received, from the original source, from the creatures that invented the art. What the badger moles taught her is seismic sense. the ability to feel the world not through her eyes but through the vibrations that everything produces in the earth beneath her feet. Every footstep, every heartbeat, every underground water source, every shift of weight, every breath, every creature moving through the dark. The world around her is a constant, detailed, three-dimensional picture built entirely from vibration and pressure transmitted through her feet. She does not see the world. She feels it, and what she feels is, in many respects, more precise than what a sighted person sees. She was put into a metal cage. The floor was metal. The walls were metal. The world outside the cage, the earth she could always feel, was separated from her feet by a layer of processed material that gave her nothing. For the first time in her life, she was genuinely blind in both senses simultaneously. No light and no vibration. She sat very still. She turned her attention toward the walls, and she felt something. Not the nothing she expected. Not the blank absence of connection that every other earthbender would have felt in the same situation and would have correctly interpreted as confirmation that metal cannot be bent. She felt a faint trace. A texture so slight, so subtle, so quiet inside the processed material, that the broad, powerful, stone-heavy connection her earthbending operated on would never in 1,000 tries have detected it. Trace amounts of earth, the particles of ore that the refining process had not eliminated completely, still present inside the metal, still carrying their connection to the original rock even after everything that had been done to separate them from it. She bent those particles. She reached through the metal with a precision that only her specific kind of sensitivity could achieve, found the fragments of unprocessed earth inside the walls, and moved them. And when she moved the trace earth, the metal that contained it moved with it. The cage opened. The men inside it who had put her there were confused for a moment about what was happening, and then the walls enclosed around them. The technical rule was not broken. Toph bent earth. She bent the earth particles inside the metal. The element was the same. What changed was the form in which she accessed it. The assumption that there was no earth in processed metal turned out to be slightly false. There was earth in it. Not much. Enough. The limitation the show maintained is equally fascinating. In The Legend of Korra, Hiroshi Sato builds weapons and vehicles from platinum, which can be refined to a purity that removes the trace earth entirely. Metalbenders cannot bend platinum. The technique that seemed to break the rule found its own internal limit, more honest than the first one. The assumption that all metal contains trace earth is the new assumption, and it is more accurate than the old one, but it is still an assumption, and platinum is the exception to the new rule, just as metal bending was the exception to the old. After her escape, Toph refined the technique and taught it. She founded the Beifong Metal Bending Academy. By the time of The Legend of Korra, metal bending has become common enough to be professional. Entire police forces use it as standard practice. Metal cable launchers, metal armor plates controlled remotely by the officers wearing them, the whole infrastructure of the New World's law enforcement built on a technique that was absolutely impossible 40 years before. The thing that makes Toph's metal bending so resonant is the reason she could find what everyone else missed. It was not that she was a more powerful earthbender. She was powerful, certainly, among the most powerful ever seen. But power alone would not have found the trace earth in the metal. What found it was her specific relationship with earth, the relationship built from necessity rather than instruction. She could not learn from human teachers in the standard way. She could not watch a demonstration and copy what she saw. She had to develop a sensitivity to earth so refined, so granular, so attuned to the smallest available signal, that she could navigate the world entirely through vibration. That sensitivity was the same sensitivity that could detect, inside a wall of processed metal, the faint signature of particles that no other earthbender ever bothered to notice, because no other earthbender needed to notice things that small. Her blindness was the instrument that broke the rule. The necessity that her disability created produced the sensitivity that the discovery required. There is a precision in this that the show keeps demonstrating across character after character. The exceptions to the rules of this world are not random. They are specific to the specific people who discover them. Toph could find the earth in metal because the earth in metal is quiet, and she is the person who learned to hear quiet things. Section 6. Fire Without Flame, Combustion Man, and the Beam from the Forehead. There is a character in Book 3 who does not get many scenes but who is among the most unsettling figures the show produces. His name is never given in the show. Aang and Sokka call him Combustion Man, and occasionally Sparky Sparky Boom Man, which is the kind of name that manages to be both comic and somehow more frightening than a dignified alternative would be. He is enormous, with a physical presence that the show uses primarily as a blunt instrument of dread. One of his limbs is a metal prosthetic. He does not speak in any of the scenes we see him in. He was hired by Zuko, in the early episodes of Book 3, to find and kill the Avatar. He is very good at his job. What makes him remarkable is the weapon he uses. Not the prosthetic limb, not any conventional firebending technique. A concentrated beam of energy that he produces from his forehead, from the exact spot where a third eye tattoo marks the center of his skull, and which travels in a perfectly straight line to its target, and at the point of contact detonates the air itself. Not the beam, the air around where the beam lands. The space detonates. The surrounding air is triggered into a massive explosive release of energy. The crater left afterward is not from a flame. It is from a concussive force that moves outward from a single point in all directions simultaneously. Nothing in the show's existing firebending framework accounts for this. Let us be specific about why. Firebending, as the show has established it across 2 full seasons, is a full-body practice. It is Northern Shaolin Kung Fu applied to the production and manipulation of fire and lightning. The arms reach outward. The legs provide the stance and the momentum. The breath fuels the production. The chi moves through the limbs to produce the element at their extremities. Even lightning generation, which is the most refined and dangerous firebending technique in the standard framework, works by separating chi through the hands and allowing it to reconnect in an outward discharge. The body is involved. The arms are involved. Combustion Man uses his forehead. More precisely, he channels chi not outward through limbs but upward through the body's central axis, through the energy pathways that run vertically through the torso and head. The route this chi takes ends at his third eye tattoo, at the exact location that Guru Pathik, earlier in the series, identified as the seat of the 6th chakra, the chakra of light, the chakra associated with inner vision, with seeing the connections between things, with the faculty that perceives what the physical eyes cannot. He routes chi through the chakra of inner light and produces a weapon. The irony is structurally perfect in a show that loves structural symmetry. The spiritual center most associated with perception and wisdom, the point on the body that Hindu and Buddhist traditions identify with psychic sight and cosmic awareness, is being used as a targeting system for a devastatingly effective explosive technique. The eye that is supposed to see the connections between things has been converted into the thing that terminates those connections. His weakness mirrors this in the same dark way. If an object strikes his third eye tattoo, the chi flow through that point is interrupted. When chi is interrupted mid-flow in a highly compressed and charged technique, the energy has nowhere to go. It cannot complete its journey to the target. It detonates immediately at the point of exit. This is what Sokka's boomerang accomplishes in the fight at the Western Air Temple. A small projectile hits the tattoo at the wrong moment, and Combustion Man is killed by his own chi reflecting back into him at full force. His power is his vulnerability. The forehead is both the weapon and the weakness. Take away the channel, and the channel destroys you. The Dawn of Yangchen, a novel set in an earlier era of the Avatar world, revealed that combustion bending did not always look exactly the way Combustion Man practiced it. Earlier users of the technique required multiple breaths between shots. They had not yet developed the third eye tattoo. Most strikingly, the novel describes their abilities as not innate, but developed through a deliberate and dangerous experimental process. Multiple subjects apparently died or were catastrophically harmed before the successful ones emerged. Combustion bending, unlike most of the techniques in the show, was engineered. It was worked toward deliberately by people who understood that chi could be channeled through the 6th chakra and who pushed that understanding into territory that cost lives to explore. This changes the texture of Combustion Man as a character, or rather it gives texture to a character the show deliberately kept flat and functional. He is not someone who discovered combustion bending through a moment of insight or desperation the way Toph discovered metal bending. He is the product of a process. Someone, at some point in the Avatar world's history, decided to investigate whether the 6th chakra could be weaponized, and they found that it could, and the refinement of the technique over generations eventually produced the man the show gives us. Silent, lethal, and carrying in his forehead a technique that bends neither fire in the conventional sense nor any other element, but something that firebending at the extreme of one very specific path eventually becomes. The rule combustion bending breaks is the rule that firebending is a full-body, outward-extending practice, that it works through the limbs and the breath, that the body is involved in the production and direction of the element. Combustion Man stands nearly still, turns his face, activates the point on his skull, and the world in front of him explodes. The arms are not involved. The breath is not the driver. The technique happens through the center of the forehead and nowhere else. Whether the show considers this still to be firebending is not fully resolved. It channels chi through the body. The energy it produces is explosive. The tradition from which it appears to descend is firebending. But it produces no fire in the conventional sense, and it violates the choreographic logic that gives all the other firebending in the show its distinctive visual grammar. It is something new. Something that firebending became when someone decided to take it somewhere the original practitioners had not considered going. Section 7. The Lion Turtle's Gift. Energy bending before there were elements. Before fire. Before earth. Before water. Before air. Before any of it. This is where the show takes you in the last quiet days before the finale. It takes you to a beach at dawn, and to a sound that is not quite sound, and to a creature so ancient that it looks from any reasonable distance like a small island. It has a forest growing on its back. It has been alive since before the nations were nations, since before bending was organized into 4 disciplines and assigned to 4 peoples. Aang does not recognize it for what it is until it speaks, and what it speaks to him is older than anything else in the show. The Lion Turtle tells Aang that in the era before the Avatar, in the time when the world was still finding the shape it would take, human beings did not bend the elements, they bent the energy within themselves. This is the most dramatic cosmological statement the show makes. Not that there is a 5th element. Not that there is a bending art that no one knows about. The statement is that the 4 bending arts are not the original thing. They are downstream of something else. They are expressions, forms, manifestations of something more fundamental that existed before any of them, and that underlies all of them. The Lion Turtles gave elemental bending to humans. They did not discover it or create it. They gave it, the way a teacher opens a door. Before the door opened, people bent energy, the energy within themselves. Energy bending is not a 5th element. It is the substrate, the material beneath the materials. The thing that the 4 elements are made of, in the sense that all physical reality is ultimately energy in one configuration or another. The legend of Korra expanded this history in ways that made it concrete. It showed Avatar Wan, the first Avatar, receiving his element from a lion turtle directly, in an act that looked less like a student learning a technique and more like a gift being conferred. The lion turtle placed its enormous paw on Wan's chest and gave him a connection to an element he had not been born with. This process, repeated with each of the 4 elements as Wan traveled the world and encountered lion turtles for each, is the origin of the Avatar's ability to bend all 4. The lion turtles are fountains, not of the elements themselves but of the human capacity to connect with them. They can give, they can take back, and in the most extreme case, as Aang's meeting on the floating island demonstrates, they can give the original thing, the energy that the elements are expressions of. What Aang receives from the lion turtle is the knowledge of energy bending and the warning that comes with it. The warning is not about technique, it is about character. To bend another's energy, the lion turtle says, your own spirit must be unbendable. If it is not, if there is any instability, any doubt, any place in you that can be moved by what you encounter in the other person's spirit, you will be corrupted and destroyed. This is a requirement unlike any other in the show. Every other bending technique can be practiced by degrees. You learn the basic movement, you refine it, you develop precision and power over time. You fail, you learn from the failure, you improve. Energy bending cannot be practiced that way. You cannot do it partially. You cannot attempt it with incomplete confidence and walk away having learned something. You attempt it in full, and either your spirit holds or it is engulfed by the spirit you are engaging with. Aang nearly fails. In the moment when he presses his hands to Ozai's chest and initiates the process, Ozai's spirit pushes back. Ozai is not a small spiritual presence. He has been shaped by a lifetime of absolute power and the conviction that the world belongs to him and that his will is the appropriate organizing force of reality. That is a very particular kind of spiritual mass. It does not yield easily. And in the animation, You watch Aang's white and blue light begin to be overwhelmed by Ozai's orange and red. The colors of the Bender's spirit are literally visible. Ozai's energy is engulfing Aang's. The corruption the lion turtle warned about is happening in real time. What stops it is not more power. What stops it is the quality of Aang's spirit, his true heart and his true mind, as the show phrases it, the specific and unexchangeable nature of who Aang actually is. Not his skills, not his training, not the 11 years of being the Avatar's latest incarnation. The 61 episodes of being Aang. The vegetarianism, the compassion, the terrible jokes, the deep and genuine care he extends to everyone he meets. The decision, repeated across 3 seasons in 100 small moments and in the final enormous moment of the series' climax, not to become something other than himself no matter what the situation seemed to require. His spirit does not bend because it has been tested repeatedly and has not bent. Not because he is the Avatar, not because of any cosmological special status, because he is, stubbornly and completely, himself. Critics called energy bending a deus ex machina when the show aired. The lion turtle appears without extensive narrative build-up in the main plot. The technique resolves the central dilemma of the show in a way that lets Aang win without killing. The creators dispute the deus ex machina reading, pointing out that the lion turtle was foreshadowed across all 3 seasons and that the technique's requirements, a spirit unbendable enough to engage directly with Ozai's, were themselves the result of 3 seasons of character development. The power was not handed to Aang. The person capable of using it was built, episode by episode, choice by choice, from the boy in the iceberg to the Avatar in the finale. The rule energy bending breaks is the oldest rule in the world. The rule that bending is about the elements, that the system has 4 corners, and the Avatar occupies all 4, and everyone else occupies 1. Energy bending is not a corner, it is the floor, the foundation on which the corners stand. It predates the 4 arts and will presumably persist after them, carried by lion turtles who have been alive since before the current shape of the world. The show places this revelation at the very end of its story, and the placement is right. You need to understand the system completely before you can understand what the system is built on. You need to have learned the rules, absorbed them, accepted them as the whole truth, before you can encounter the thing that reveals they were never the whole truth. Energy bending is not a rule break in the mechanical sense. It does not violate the laws of bending because it exists prior to those laws. But it breaks the narrative rule, the assumption the show has built in its audience, that the 4 elements are the foundation. It puts a floor beneath the floor. It tells you that every time you thought you understood this world, the world was larger than you thought. Section 8. Spirit Bending and the Void. When Aang refused to kill, every Avatar who came before him told him to kill Ozai. Not 1 or 2 of them. Not the ones with a particular philosophical tradition that might be expected to favor that answer. All 4 of the past Avatars he could reach agreed. Roku, measured and wise, and carrying his own guilt about what he failed to stop. Kyoshi, who once killed a man directly with her own bending when the situation required it and who spent no time afterward wondering if she had made the right choice. Kuruk, who was haunted by different failures but who understood the world's need for decisive action. And most pointedly, Yang Chen, the air nomad Avatar who came before Kuruk and who made the argument directly and with full knowledge of who she was saying it to. Yang Chen told Aang that the greatest mistake of the air nomads was letting their spiritual commitment get in the way of the world's practical needs. That the Avatar's duty to the world comes before any commitment to a particular tradition's values, even the tradition the Avatar was born into. She said this as an air nomad. She said it knowing that Aang was an air nomad. She was telling him, with the authority of a past life, that his pacifism was not an appropriate tool for this particular situation. And Aang said no. Not loudly, not with a speech. He simply could not find in himself a version of the action being asked for that he was willing to carry out. He could not make peace with it. He could not locate the place inside him where killing Ozai was something he would choose, even knowing what Ozai had done and would do, even with every past Avatar and every well-intentioned person around him pointing in that direction. The refusal was not argumentative. It was structural. He was not able to be the person who killed Ozai and still be Aang. The action and the identity were incompatible. The show takes this seriously. It does not resolve the tension by having Aang articulate a counter-argument that convinces everyone. It does not vindicate him through a sequence where killing Ozai would clearly have made things worse. It simply leaves him with the impossibility of it, sitting with the full weight of everyone telling him he is wrong, until the lion turtle appears with an alternative. The alternative is energy bending. The alternative is reaching into Ozai and removing his ability to bend at all, permanently and completely, not killing him, rendering him unable to use fire to harm anyone ever again, taking away the instrument rather than the instrument's wielder. And here is the thing. This is not a clean victory. It is not a comfortable solution. Energy bending, as we discussed, nearly costs Aang everything. Ozai's spirit is strong enough to almost engulf Aang's. The technique works only because the spirit inside Aang is, after 3 seasons and 61 episodes of being itself, genuine enough and rooted enough to not be moved. But it is close. It is genuinely close. The rule that gets broken here is not a bending rule. It is a rule of narrative gravity. The rule that says the final battle of a story must cost the protagonist something proportionate to what was at stake. That the villain of this scope, who represents this much accumulated harm to this many people, cannot be neutralized through a technique that leaves him alive and removes only his power. That there must be a heavier toll. What the show argues, through Aang's refusal and its outcome, is that the heaviest toll is not the blood of the enemy. The heaviest toll is the integrity of the hero. If Aang kills Ozai, something is gone that cannot come back. Not just a philosophical position or a cultural value inherited from the air nomads, something specific to who Aang is. The show has spent 3 seasons showing you this specific person in enough granular detail that you understand what his limits are. You understand where the line is. You understand that crossing it would be a loss, not a victory, even if the war ended on the same day. The spirit bending, the energy bending used to strip Ozai's power, is the show finding the one solution that wins the war without losing Aang. Not a convenient solution handed to the protagonist from outside. A solution that was only possible because of who the protagonist had spent 3 seasons becoming. The void at the center of this section is not empty. It is dense with all the versions of the story that did not happen. Every timeline in which Aang killed Ozai and the war ended, and balance was restored and Aang was not quite Aang anymore. The show was precise enough and honest enough about its own protagonist to know that those versions were not victories. They were losses of a different kind. And it was brave enough to keep looking until it found the door that let him win and stay himself. That door was the oldest art in the world, given at the last moment by the last creature old enough to remember when it was the only art there was. The timing is not accidental. The lion turtle could not have given Aang energy bending when he was 12, frozen in ice for a century and just defrosted. He could not have used it. His spirit was not formed yet. He had not been tested. He had not refused the kill in every small way that preceded the final enormous way. The technique was always available. The person capable of using it had to be built first. Avatar spent 3 seasons building him, and then it broke the rule that said he had to become someone else in order to win. Section 9. The Avatar State, a rule that breaks the bender. There is a mechanism built into the Avatar that was not designed by any person. It is older than the Avatar as an institution. It is the result of what happens when all the accumulated knowledge and experience of hundreds of lifetimes is carried in one body, and that body comes under existential threat. It is not a conscious tool. It does not require the Avatar to decide to use it. It can trigger on its own, involuntarily, when the threat is sufficient and the Avatar's own skills are not enough. The Avatar State. In the Avatar State, the current Avatar becomes something different from a very skilled bender. They become the channel through which every past Avatar acts simultaneously. The knowledge of every waterbender, earthbender, firebender, and airbender who has worn this role across thousands of years is available and active. The power this concentrates is staggering. When young Aang first involuntarily enters it at the South Pole in Book 1, he creates a column of light visible from space. When he merges with the ocean spirit at the North Pole, the entity that results walks through an entire Fire Nation fleet without slowing. Nothing else in the show approaches this. The rule the Avatar State carries is the harshest rule in the show, and it is stated clearly by Avatar Roku in the first episode of Book 2. If the Avatar is killed while in the Avatar State, the cycle ends. Not just for this Avatar. Forever. Every incarnation that would have followed, every rebirth in the cycle that has continued for over 10,000 years, every balance that would ever again require an Avatar to maintain it, all of it stops. There is no next Avatar. There is the silence where the Avatar should be, permanent and unrepairable. This is the paradox that makes the avatar state genuinely terrifying rather than simply impressive. The same activation that gives you the power of thousands of past lives makes you the single point of failure for the future. You are at your strongest and at your most irreplaceable danger simultaneously. The state is the maximum expression of everything the avatar is, and the maximum threat to everything the avatar cycle is. It is power in the form of a knife balanced on its point. Aang almost breaks this rule. At the end of Book 2, in the caves beneath Ba Sing Se, Azula fires a bolt of lightning at Aang while he is in the avatar state. He falls. Katara has the sacred water from the spirit oasis, water saturated with the presence of Tui and La themselves, and she revives him. But in the moment between being struck and being revived, the cycle was broken. The connection was severed. The avatar state was interrupted mid-activation by death. The show depicts the consequences without making a ceremony of them. Aang wakes up changed. He regains consciousness slowly. The weight of what happened is in the room before anyone says it. When the information settles, it settles quietly. The cycle is broken. Aang is the last. If he dies before restoring it, which requires circumstances the show eventually reveals, there is nothing after him. This quietly reshapes everything that follows. Aang in Book 3 is carrying something that no previous avatar who we have met has carried. He is not just the avatar responsible for the current crisis. He is the last link in a chain, the chip in the system. Every battle he enters from this point forward has a specific weight that was not there before. The avatar state as a rule-breaking element works differently from the other breaks in this series. It does not reveal that the world is larger than the rules describe. It reveals that the avatar's own defense mechanism is a threat to the avatar's deepest purpose. The thing designed to protect the avatar is also the thing that can end everything the avatar represents. The strongest becomes the most vulnerable in the same instant. This is the show being honest about what power costs at the highest levels. Not effort, not sacrifice in the conventional sense, something closer to the specific vulnerability that comes from being the only one. The avatar state is possible because the avatar cycle concentrates all past experience into one person. That same concentration makes the person unreplaceable. You cannot have one without the other. The tremendous power and the catastrophic fragility are the same fact viewed from different angles. When Aang enters the avatar state in the finale against Ozai during the comet, the weight of this is present even though it is not discussed. He knows. He knows that what he is entering is both his greatest strength and the thing that could end everything. He enters it anyway, because the alternative is losing without it. And he maintains enough control, in the end, to use it without being killed inside it. The rule the avatar state seems to break is the rule of narrative safety. The rule that says the hero's ultimate power cannot come with a cost that large. That the protagonist cannot be made this catastrophically vulnerable at the same moment they are this supremely powerful. But this is not a break. This is the most honest thing the show ever says about power. Real power at this scale does not exist without a proportionate shadow. Section 10. Every small break, the dozens of quiet violations hidden in the background. Every section so far has been about a spectacular, scene-defining moment. The Blue Fire debut, the Puppet Master and the blood. The man with lightning flowing through his body. The girl who bent the unbendable. The oldest art in the world passed from a creature that looked like an island. But Avatar broke its own rules in smaller, quieter ways constantly throughout all 3 seasons. The kind of breaks that are not announced, not given their own dramatic reveal, not framed as revelations that change everything. They are simply there, embedded in the background of episodes, present in details the camera does not stop to underline. And when you collect them, when you lay them out together and look at what they share, they tell a story that is as complete as any of the dramatic moments. They tell you that the system was always more flexible than it looked. The Foggy Swamp Tribe is the first place the show shows you something that is technically waterbending, but that looks nothing like what Katara or Pakku practice. The swamp benders move the moisture inside plant vines. They make the water that flows through living vegetation ripple and coil and strike like animated arms. The vines lash out in the fog, grasping and deflecting, and the benders controlling them use fluid, continuous movements that look more like conventional waterbending than anything else. The show presents this as a regional adaptation, a tribe who developed their practice to suit the environment they inhabit. But look at what it actually represents. Waterbending. applied to the water inside organic matter rather than to external water sources. The water is not in a river or a puddle. It is inside the cells of living plants. The waterbender is reaching into the interior of a living thing and bending the water there. This is Book 2, quietly laying groundwork for Book 3. The Foggy Swamp Tribe's vine bending and Hama's blood bending share the same underlying principle: water inside organic matter. Water inside living things. The Swamp Tribe bends it in plants. Hama bends it in people. The principle is identical. The escalation of what it means is what changes. The show placed the gentler version of the concept an entire book before the disturbing version, so that when bloodbending appears, the audience has already seen a version of the logic. They just did not know they had seen it. Lava bending is another quiet rule break that appears at the edges of the show's world and expands in the sequel series. The technique involves superheating Earth until it becomes molten rock and then moving and shaping it. An earthbender who can lava bend is working with something that is simultaneously earth and fire, something that has the Earth's origin and the fire's temperature and the water element's fluid behavior. It sits at the intersection of three elemental categories simultaneously. The show's answer is that lava is still Earth. Technically, geologically, it is molten rock, which is rock that has had heat applied to it, which is Earth in a different phase of matter. The earthbender who can lava bend is bending the Earth through the phase change, maintaining the connection to the material across a transformation that other earthbenders could not follow, because they were thinking of Earth only in its solid state. The technique is not easy. It is described as rare in a way that suggests an innate disposition rather than a learnable skill, something that certain earthbenders have a relationship with that most do not. Sandbending, which we see in the Great Desert of the Earth Kingdom in Book 2, is a milder expression of the same underlying flexibility. Sand is earth. It is also fluid. It flows through hands. It drifts with the wind. It behaves in many respects more like water than like stone. And the people who bend it use movements that are flowing and continuous, rather than the rooted, direct, impact-driven style of conventional earthbending. They have adapted the grammar of their element to the specific form their environment gives it. Earth in the desert moves like water. Earthbending in the desert begins to look like waterbending. Not because the element changes, but because the element's form changes, and the bender changes with it. This pattern of benders adapting their practice to the specific forms their environment presents is one of the show's quietest arguments about the relationship between people and their element. The four elements are not fixed types. They exist in multiple phases and multiple forms, and the benders who know them most deeply are the ones who can follow the element through its transformations, rather than relating only to the most obvious version of it. Toph follows earth into metal. The Swamp Tribe follows water into plant fiber. The Sandbenders follow earth into dune and drift. Lava benders follow earth into fire. Each one is finding that the category was bigger than the textbook suggested. Flight and airbending is a version of this that takes the philosophical content rather than the physical form to its extreme. True sustained flight, not the glider-assisted jumps and air-cushioned leaps that Aang uses routinely, but weightless hovering that requires no mechanical assistance, was achieved by a single airbender in recorded history before Zahir achieved it in The Legend of Korra. Guru Lagima, who lived 4,000 years before the events of the show, is described as having let go of earthly attachments so completely that he literally rose. He wrote about it. He left poems. The poems survived him. The technique did not, or rather it survived only as legend and philosophy rather than as a teachable practice. Zahir replicates it in the moment he learns that Pali, the woman he loved, has been killed. The last attachment was severed involuntarily. His grief and his liberation happened at the same moment. He rose because there was nothing left to keep him on the ground. This is airbending at the absolute limit of its own philosophy, not technique, renunciation. The element of air, taken to its fullest philosophical expression, produces not a more powerful gust or a more precise cutting wind. It produces the absence of weight. The lifting of gravity's claim on a body that has stopped being attached to the things gravity is supposed to protect, a person floating free of the earth, not because they are pushing against it, but because they have released the need to stand on it. The rule it breaks is the assumption that bending is always a physical technique, that you learn the movements, you practice the form, you develop skill, Lahima and Zahir achieve flight not through greater skill in airbending movements, but through a quality of inner state that makes those movements unnecessary. They are not airbending flight into existence. They are releasing the attachments that kept them earthbound, and flight is what remains. Healing is a waterbending subskill that is presented so naturally and so early in Katara's character that it is easy to forget it represents a rule break of its own kind. Healing with water, reaching into the body's energy pathways with bending sensitivity, and using flowing water to restore damaged tissue, is technically the same kind of territory as bloodbending. It is waterbending turned toward the interior of a living body, feeling the water in the cells and the blood, and using it as a medium for restoration rather than control. The moral difference between healing and bloodbending is vast. The technical territory they occupy is adjacent. Katara's instinct toward healing is established before it is formalized as a technique. In early episodes, long before the show gives waterbending healing an official demonstration, Katara reaches toward water when someone is hurt. The gesture is small and half-conscious. The show does not underline it. It is just there, in the animation, in the behavior of a character. The show has spent enough time with that her instincts feel like character rather than foreshadowing. And then later, when the healing technique is formally introduced, it does not feel like a new power. It feels like the naming of something that was always there. Lightning generation itself, which we have already discussed in Iroh's context, is worth returning to briefly here. The technique requires emotional clarity, the complete absence of turbulence in the bender's chi. The people who can generate it in the show are Ozai, Azula, and eventually Mako in The Legend of Korra. All of them share a certain quality of interior organization that the show treats as specific to the technique's requirements. What is interesting is that Aang redirects lightning in the finale. He is in the avatar state, which gives him access to the techniques of all past avatars. If any past avatar learned lightning generation or redirection, Aang has access to it through the state. This is the avatar state at its most specific application, the ability to perform techniques that the current avatar's own training has not reached, because some previous incarnation had reached them. The avatar state makes Aang, in those moments, not Aang exactly. He is the sum of everyone who came before. This is the most expansive rule break available to the avatar, the one that makes every other technique in the show potentially accessible through a single activation. The rule that says each bender is limited to their own training and development gets suspended for the avatar when the state is active. The avatar becomes, temporarily, the accumulated tradition. Every rule that any past avatar ever broke is available. And there is the small, quiet break that most viewers do not consciously register but that contributes to the texture of the show in ways the research and thought that went into it made inevitable. When Aang moves, he moves differently. Not just in bending sequences. In ordinary movement, walking, running, jumping without conscious airbending, his animation is lighter. His feet touch the ground with less weight than other characters. He skims rather than runs. The animators gave him a distinct locomotion cycle based on the idea that an airbender, even when not actively bending, has a different relationship to the air than non-benders and earth-centered benders do. The element has shaped the body over years of practice. The rule of airbending, that air seeks to be unweighted, has become literal in his movement. This one is not a rule break exactly. It is a rule so thoroughly integrated into character that it has become physical. The element and the person have merged at the level of how he takes a step. Together, all of these small breaks say the same thing as the large ones. The rules of Avatar's world are real and they have weight, and they shape everything inside the show. And the world is also larger than its rules. It has always been larger. Every time someone pushed against a limit, they found that the limit was not a wall but a surface, and on the other side of the surface was more world. The four elements are not fixed types with fixed properties and fixed applications. They are directions. They are philosophies given physical form, and every direction, pushed far enough, approaches the others. Water, taken far enough toward its principle of change and flow and interiority, becomes bloodbending. Earth, taken far enough toward its principle of substance and connection, becomes metal bending. Fire, taken far enough toward its principle of internal chi production and the path of the third eye, becomes combustion bending. Air, taken far enough toward its principle of release and non-attachment, becomes flight without wings. And all four, taken to their deepest foundation, reveal the energy beneath them. The thing that was there first, the lion turtle's gift, the original art that the four elements are expressions of. The rules make the world feel real, the exceptions make it feel alive. And the beautiful, precise, specific relationship between the rules and their exceptions, the way each exception reveals something true about the rule it appears to violate, is the thing that makes Avatar, The Last Airbender, the kind of show that people carry with them for 20 years and come back to and find, every single time, that there is still something they had not noticed. The calligraphy you cannot read makes the world feel older, the martial art you cannot name makes the fights feel real, the lunar cycle you did not track makes the siege of the North Pole feel inevitable, and the rule that blue fire is not possible makes the moment when Azula descends from that war balloon, with her perfectly controlled blue flame, feel like the revelation it is. Someone built this world with enough care to make its exceptions as true as its rules. Enough care to make the breaking of the rules into the deepest expression of what the rules were pointing at all along. Enough care to make you feel, when the blue fire appears or the blood moves in the wrong direction or the trace earth inside the metal gives way, not that something impossible has happened, but that something inevitable has finally arrived. The rules were always going to be broken. The world was always going to be larger than they described. The only question was when, and who, and what it would cost them. Now you know every time it happened. Let the screen go dark. Let the images settle. Azula with her perfect blue flame before it came apart. Toph sitting still in the metal cage, feeling with more sensitivity than anyone thought possible. Iroh watching water bend and thinking thoughts that a firebender was not supposed to think. Hama in the dark with the rats and the full moon she could not see. Aang pressing his hands to Ozai's chest and nearly losing the thing that makes him himself. The world of Avatar is still there, all 61 episodes, all 3 books, all the calligraphy and the martial arts forms, and the sleeping positions, and the lunar cycles, and the trace earth inside the walls. The rules are still there. The breaks are still there. They will be there every time you go back. And tonight, they are carrying you gently towards somewhere quieter. Let them. If this reached you, leave a like. It is 1 second and it matters more than you know. Subscribe if you have not, because there is so much more of this kind of content coming and I do not want you to miss any of it. Drop a comment with the one rule break that landed with you tonight. I read every single one of them. Sleep well. The world of Avatar will be here when you wake up. It always is. End of script. Extended interlude. The philosophy of the exception and what it means for the world. Before we reach the end, there is something worth sitting with that connects every break we have discussed tonight into a single argument that the show was making, quietly and persistently, from the very first episode to the last. Avatar. The Last Airbender is not primarily a show about bending. It is a show about learning, about what it means to understand something deeply enough that you can see past your own understanding into the larger truth on the other side. Every single rule break in this show is not an exception to a law. It is a student who studied long enough to find the door their teachers did not know was there. Consider Toph again for a moment, because her story is the most explicit version of this pattern. Every earthbender in the history of the discipline accepted, as a foundational truth, that metal could not be bent. This was not a belief they held weakly or questioned privately. It was background, the same way the sky being above you and the ground being below you is background. It simply did not occur to anyone to push against it, because the evidence for it was total. Every earthbender who had ever been near metal and tried to bend it had found nothing. The message was consistent and unanimous. Metal is outside the reach of earthbending. What changed with Toph was not power. What changed was the relationship. Every other earthbender had learned the art through instruction, through watching a teacher and copying, through the accumulated tradition of what earthbending is and how it works and what it can and cannot do. That tradition had produced immense skill and understanding. It had also produced an invisible limitation. The assumption that what earthbending had historically done was the full scope of what earthbending could do. Toph learned from badger moles. She learned from the source. And what the source taught her was not a list of techniques but a relationship, a way of feeling the world through the earth that was more fundamental than any specific technique. The techniques were downstream of the relationship. The relationship came first. When she was in the metal cage, she did not try earthbending in the conventional sense and find it inadequate. She brought the relationship to the new situation. She felt for Earth the way she always felt for Earth, with the full depth of her seismic sensitivity, and she found it inside the walls, not because she was trying to bend metal, because she was having the relationship with Earth that she always had, and the Earth answered from wherever it existed, including inside the walls that everyone else believed contained none. This is the show's deepest argument about what it means to truly know something. True knowledge of an element is not knowing all the techniques that tradition has developed for working with it. True knowledge is the relationship itself. And the relationship does not stop at the boundaries that tradition has drawn around it. The same argument runs through Iroh. Iroh did not discover lightning redirection by being a more powerful firebender. He discovered it by being a firebender who had become genuinely curious about the other elements, who had traveled and watched and absorbed without defending his own identity against what he was learning. He did not study waterbending to become a waterbender. He studied it the way a true scholar studies anything, without having decided in advance what conclusions were acceptable. He watched the waterbenders redirect force and he thought, what if the same principle applies somewhere in my own practice that I have not considered? The answer was lightning. The discovery was available to any firebender who had ever genuinely engaged with waterbending philosophy. Nobody had bothered to look, because the boundary between elements was assumed to be total. Iroh stopped assuming and started looking. And Hama, who discovered something that nobody had ever found, not because she was more sensitive than other waterbenders, but because she was in a situation that forced her to think about water in a way that no other waterbender had been forced to. Think about it. The prison that was designed to take her power away was the instrument of her discovery of the most extreme expression of that power. The people who put her in the cage thought they were neutralizing her. They were, without intending to, giving her the exact conditions of desperation and isolation that produced the one insight that would have been impossible in a comfortable life surrounded by rivers and oceans. Necessity and the exception are linked in this show. The moments when the rules break are almost always the moments when something impossible is required. Toph needed to escape the metal cage. Hama needed to survive a waterless prison. Iroh needed to survive lightning in a world where the standard firebending approach to lightning was to generate it rather than receive it. Aang needed to defeat Ozai without becoming someone other than himself. Each impossible requirement produced an impossible solution, and each impossible solution turned out to be not impossible but merely unprecedented. The show is making a case that the limits of what has been done are not the limits of what can be done. That tradition, for all its value, carries inside it a particular kind of blindness. The blindness of what has always worked so well that nobody considered whether anything else might work too. And the people who find what tradition cannot find are almost always the people who are somehow outside the tradition, too young to have fully internalized it, like Toph, transformed by loss into someone who could no longer afford the assumptions they had previously lived by, like Iroh, trapped in a situation where the tradition was deliberately made unavailable, like Hama, or born as the one person in the world whose entire purpose is to exist at the boundaries of the tradition, like the Avatar. This argument has a political dimension that the show pursues carefully throughout all 3 seasons, but that becomes clearest in the finale. The Fire Nation under Ozai is the most extreme version of what happens when a tradition turns its assumption of its own rightness into policy. The Fire Nation decided, at some point in the recent past, that its element and its culture were superior, that its expansion was improvement, that what it was imposing on other nations was a gift. This is not presented in the show as the belief of evil people. It is presented as the belief of people who were so thoroughly inside their own tradition that the tradition had become transparent to them. They could no longer see it as a tradition because it was simply reality. Their reality, the air nomads, who were destroyed by the Fire Nation, represent something different. Not a perfect or uncritical culture, but one whose deepest practice was the release of fixed positions, the willingness to be in the world without gripping, the breath that goes out as easily as it comes in. Monks who owned little, moved constantly, refused to accumulate power or territory, trained in the understanding that the self is not a fixed thing to be defended but a flow to be inhabited with lightness. The Avatar, born into the air nomad tradition but belonging to all 4, is the living argument that the traditions are not walls, that the elements are not territories to be defended but perspectives on a shared reality, that the truest understanding of any element eventually leads, if followed far enough, to an understanding of the others. Aang's airbending, at the end of the series, is still airbending. He did not learn to make it something else, but it coexists in him with water, earth, and fire in a way that has deepened each one. He bends earth with the lightness of an airbender, which allows him to use it differently from the way Toph does, which is not better or worse but different, a different relationship with the same substance. He bends fire with the restraint of his air nomad training, which is why the dragons responded to him the way they did, recognizing in his fire the quality that the Sun Warrior's original firebending was supposed to have. He bends water with an ease that comes from understanding that water and air share a philosophy of flow and non-resistance. The Avatar is not just someone who can bend all four elements. The Avatar is someone who has been given the opportunity to learn from all four, and through that learning, to see the single thing that all four are pointing at. The energy, the source, the thing the lion turtle guards and occasionally gives. Every rule break in this show is a smaller version of the same journey, a person who knows their element deeply enough to find what lies beneath the known. A person whose specific life circumstances push them past the comfortable boundary of what the tradition had already done. A person who discovered that the element was larger than the map. The rules of Avatar's world are true. Every single one of them is true, and the show never abandons them. The exceptions do not disprove the rules, they extend them. They reveal that the rules were describing the element from one angle, a valid and important angle, but not the only angle. The element seen from all angles is more than any single tradition could contain. This is what makes the show worth returning to after 20 years. Not just the beauty of the animation or the strength of the characters or the precision of the world building, although all of those things are real and remarkable. It is the argument the show makes. Through every exception and every extension and every moment when a rule gave way to something larger, about what it means to truly know something. You do not truly know a thing until you know what it does when you push past every assumption you have about it. You do not truly know an element until you find its bluest fire, and its blood, and its trace earth, and its oldest light. You do not truly know a world until you know what it does when someone who grew up outside its normal boundaries tries to be in it and finds, in the trying, a door that was always there. The show's world is full of those doors. They were open all along. The final section. The return to the rules, and why they matter more after being broken. We began tonight with the observation that Avatar built one of the most satisfying rule systems in the history of animated storytelling. A grammar of elements so consistent and so physically embodied that viewers absorbed it the way children absorb language, through repetition and pattern rather than explanation and instruction. Let us end with the observation that the rules matter more, not less, because of every time the show found a reason to break them. This is a paradox that most rule systems do not manage to achieve. Usually, a world that establishes strong rules and then violates them ends up with rules that feel arbitrary. If the rule can be broken, why believe in it? If the exception is possible, why accept the constraint? The rule break becomes evidence that the rule was never real, only a convenience that the story abandoned when it became inconvenient. Avatar escapes this because of how its exceptions work. Every exception is earned by a specific person in a specific situation, and the earning is shown, not stated. Toph does not simply discover metal bending because the plot requires her to. She discovers it because she has spent 12 years developing a sensitivity to Earth that no other Earthbender has, and that sensitivity is the exact instrument that can find the trace Earth in metal. The discovery is inevitable given who she is. It could not have happened to anyone else at that time in the show's world. The specificity of the exception is what prevents it from undermining the rule. The rule is not that Earthbenders cannot bend metal. The rule is that the connection between Earthbender and Earth is the instrument, and that connection, taken to its furthest development, can follow Earth wherever Earth goes. This is a more complete version of the rule, not a contradiction of it. The same holds for every other exception we discussed tonight. Azula's blue fire is not a contradiction of the rule that firebending produces orange flames. It is the rule taken to the extreme of a person who has eliminated all combustion inefficiency from her interior life. Bloodbending is not a contradiction of waterbending. It is waterbending's fundamental principle, which is the bending of water wherever water exists, taken to its most intimate and most disturbing conclusion. Lightning redirection is not a contradiction of firebending. It is firebending enriched by the philosophy of another element, producing something that neither tradition could have produced alone. Each break is a more complete understanding of the same thing the rule was pointing at all along. This is why the rules of this world feel more real after being broken, not less. Because the breaks consistently reveal depth rather than arbitrariness. They show you that the people who made this world were not just inventing rules for their story's convenience. They were thinking through the implications of a physical and philosophical system at a level that most storytellers do not reach. They were asking not just what the rules are, but what they mean, what they are expressions of, what you find if you follow them past the edge of the known. And what you find, every single time, is the energy beneath, the original thing, the life force that the elements are forms of, that the lion turtle has tended since before the nations had names, that Aang used to defeat Ozai without losing himself. The thing underneath the rules that makes the rules possible. Every blue flame, every bent blood, every trace earth in the cage wall, every lightning bolt received and redirected, every third eye opened as a weapon, every ancient turtle offering the oldest knowledge at the last possible moment. All of it was pointing at the same thing. The energy, the life, the source. The rules of Avatar's world are a beautiful and precise description of the world. The exceptions to those rules are the world's way of showing you that the description was never the whole thing, that the map was always smaller than the territory, that the territory, if you know how to move through it with the right kind of attention, will reveal rooms that the map never showed. This is the show's gift to everyone who watches it carefully, whether at 7 years old or 27 or 47. There are always more rooms. There is always something that the rules, faithfully followed and deeply loved, did not fully capture. There is always a trace of earth in the metal, waiting for someone sensitive enough and patient enough and driven enough to feel it. You have been given a very thorough tour of this world's exceptions tonight. You know where the blue fire comes from and what it costs. You know what the blood holds. You know how lightning moves through a body that receives it without resisting. You know where the oldest art lives and what you need to be to use it. But here is what all of it points toward, what all of it is about beneath the techniques and the philosophy and the careful world building. It is about the people. Every single exception in this show exists because of a specific person in a specific situation who was shaped in a specific way by specific experiences. The world did not break its rules randomly. It broke them for Toph, for Hama, for Iroh, for Azula, for Aang, for people whose lives had pushed them to the edge of what the tradition could account for, and who found, at that edge, something new. The rules of Avatar's world are a tribute to the order that makes life possible. The exceptions are a tribute to the people who have always lived slightly beyond what order can contain. Both are necessary, both are true. And both, if you pay enough attention, are beautiful. Close your eyes. Let the world settle. Let the orange fire and the blue fire and the blood and the metal and the oldest light all settle into the quiet place where this kind of thing lives in the mind. Not as information, but as feeling. The feeling of a world that was built with enough love to hide its deepest things where only the careful would find them. The feeling of a show that trusted you to find them. You found them. Or you let them find you, which in this world amounts to the same thing. Sleep well. End of script. Deeper dive the rules that almost broke the world, and the people who found the gaps. There is a category of rule break in this show that we have not fully explored yet, and it deserves its own space because it sits in a different register from the bending exceptions we have been discussing. These are the breaks that almost broke the world. The ones where an exception to the rules did not just expand the understanding of an element, but threatened to destabilize the entire balance that the Avatar cycle was built to maintain. The moments where someone found a door in the wall of the world, and what was on the other side was not more world, or not only more world, but also danger at a scale that could not be quietly contained. Consider what Hama's bloodbending actually set in motion across the generations following the main story. The technique she invented to survive her captivity became, in the hands of Yakon and his sons, a tool for the kind of power the Avatar cycle exists to prevent. Yakon could bloodbend without the full moon. He could do it without visible movement, without the dramatic extended gesture that conventional bloodbending requires. He could reach out and grip an entire room full of people simultaneously and hold them in place while he did whatever he wanted. The city of Republic City, which Aang and his friends built as a symbol of a new world where the 4 nations could live together, was held in the shadow of this ability for years. Yakone controlled judges, he controlled officials, he controlled the legal and civic infrastructure of the city, without anyone who was not him knowing exactly how. This is bloodbending taken to a political conclusion. The technique Hama invented to free herself from a waterless prison evolved, in the next generation, into a mechanism of authoritarian control over a free society. The same principle, the same understanding of water's presence in living bodies, the same fundamental discovery that the water inside a person is water that can be bent, arrived at an application that Hama, for all her eventual cruelty, never reached. She controlled individuals out of revenge and bitterness. Yakon controlled entire institutions out of ambition. And then Yakon's son Amon took it further still. Amon's ability to permanently remove a person's bending, which he used as the foundation of an entire political movement, is bloodbending developed to a degree of precision and depth that approaches the territory of energy bending. He was not just moving the water and the chi pathways, he was blocking those pathways at a structural level, doing something to the bender's internal energy architecture that conventional healing, even Katara's exceptional healing, could not reverse. He was reaching into the energetic foundation of a person's bending ability and damaging it from the inside. This is the rule break that multiplied across generations. The discovery of bloodbending unlocked a chain of developments, each one building on what the previous one found, each one taking the original exception further than the previous discoverer had taken it. Hama found the door. Yakon widened it. Amon walked through it somewhere new. The same dynamic applies to lightning generation. The technique was originally, within the show's established lore, available only to the most skilled and most emotionally controlled firebenders. Ozai, Azula, Iroh, who could generate it though, chose not to use it for harm. The numbers were small because the prerequisite, the specific interior stillness that lightning requires, was rare. By the time of the Legend of Korra, this has changed. Lightning generation has become industrialized. Republic City uses firebenders generating lightning as one of its primary sources of electrical power. The technique that required exceptional emotional control in the era of the main story has become common enough to be a job skill, a way to earn a wage by standing at a generator and producing electricity on demand. How do you account for this? Two explanations seem most likely. Either the specific emotional state required has been more widely achieved, perhaps because the world is more peaceful and more benders have the opportunity to cultivate it, or the technique itself has been refined, taught, and practiced across generations in ways that have made it more accessible than it originally was, the same way any skill that begins as the province of rare talents often becomes learnable through good instruction over time. Either way, the exceptional has become ordinary. The rule break of lightning generation, which in the original series was a marker of elite skill and extreme inner discipline, is by the sequel series as mundane as running a power plant. The exception expanded until it became part of the system. This is actually what the show argues should happen with genuine discoveries. When Toph invented metal bending and then taught it, she did not hoard the technique. She founded an academy. She taught as many people as she could reach who were willing to learn. She wanted metal bending to become ordinary. And by the Legend of Korra, it has. The metal bending police force is an institution. The exception has been absorbed into the tradition, which has become larger for having absorbed it. This is the healthy version of what happens when the rules get broken. The break is real and significant. The discoverer shares what they found. The tradition grows to accommodate the new knowledge. The world is bigger than it was, and the bigger world becomes the new baseline, the new set of rules that the next generation will accept as simply and obviously true. Until someone comes along who is shaped by the right necessity and the right relationship with the element to push past those rules too, and find what lies beneath them, the unhealthy version is what Hama's discovery became in Yakon and Amon's hands. The exception propagated not as an expansion of understanding but as a weapon. The knowledge of bloodbending did not enter the tradition as something taught openly and used constructively, because bloodbending has no constructive use. It propagated through secrecy and inheritance and the specific genealogical accident of talent being passed from parent to child in a lineage that treated human autonomy as negotiable. It became more refined with each generation not through scholarship and open practice but through the selective breeding of cruelty. The show's response was to outlaw it, to recognize that some exceptions to the rules are not discoveries that expand the tradition, but discoveries that threaten the foundation the tradition is built on. Bending exists in this world as an expression of the relationship between people and elements. That relationship, at its core, is about working with the element, about being in dialogue with it, about the mutual recognition of the bender and the thing they bend. Bloodbending converts that relationship into something else. It converts the bender's connection to water into a connection not to the element, but to the person who contains it. A connection that is by definition not mutual, not consensual, not a dialogue. It is a monologue. It is control. The avatar cycle exists to maintain balance. The energy bending that the lion turtle gave Aang allowed the avatar to strip a specific bender of their specific power in specific circumstances. Bloodbending taken to Amon's level could do the same thing. An untrained non-avatar doing, in effect, what the avatar does but without the ethical framework the avatar is supposed to embody and without any accountability to the world. This is why Amon's ability was so specifically threatening in the Legend of Korra. It was not just powerful. It was a disruption of the cosmic balance of who holds what authority in this world. The avatar is supposed to be the check on benders who abuse their power. What happens when someone outside the avatar structure can perform the avatar's most extreme intervention? The answer the show reaches is that the avatar state and energy bending, while similar to Amon's technique in their effects, are different in their source. The avatar's power comes from the accumulation of all past avatars and the partnership with Rava, the spirit of light and peace. It is accountable to the entire history of the role and the purpose of the role. Amon's power came from birthright and training and the specific grievance of a man who had been harmed by a bender and had organized his entire life around the project of revenge against bending itself. One is an institution, one is a wound. The show uses this distinction carefully. Korra eventually uses energy bending to restore bending that Amon took, in an act that closes the circle opened by Aang's original use of the technique against Yakon. What the Avatar took, the Avatar can give back. The institution has repair built into it. The wound that Amon represented could not repair what it destroyed. There is one more exception worth discussing at length, because it sits outside all the categories we have explored and represents the show doing something genuinely unusual with its rules. Aang's connection to past avatars through the avatar state and through meditation is a rule of the show's world that it presents as a reliable and consistent thing. The past lives are accessible. Their knowledge is available. The continuity is unbroken. This is the foundation of the avatar cycle's purpose. The accumulation of wisdom across incarnations, each avatar building on what the previous ones learned, the long conversation across time that makes the role more than any single person could be. And then Aang dies in the finale of Book 2. Technically and briefly, clinically dead. In the caves beneath Ba Sing Se. And then revived by the spirit water. And the connection breaks. The avatar cycle breaks. The unbroken continuity of 10,000 years is severed for a matter of minutes and restored only through a spiritual intervention so extraordinary that Katara was carrying the water from the spirit oasis with her in the exact right moment to use it. The rule broken here is not a bending rule. It is the rule of the avatar cycle's continuity. The rule that says the chain does not break. And the break, for the first and only time in the main story, happens to the protagonist. Not to a predecessor in a flashback, not to a historical avatar whose fate is recounted as context, to Aang. To the character the audience has been following for 2 seasons. The cycle breaks for a matter of minutes in real time, and the weight of those minutes settles into the narrative and does not lift. Aang spends much of Book 3 in his own relationship with those minutes. He is quieter than he was. Not sadder exactly, not depressed in a clinical sense, but more aware of the edges of things. The edge of the avatar cycle. The edge of what reviving him cost Katara in terms of the water she could never refill. The edge of what it would mean if she had not been there or had not had it. The rule of the cycle's continuity did not break permanently. It was repaired. But the repair left a seam, and Aang knows where the seam is. He knows that the chain that has been unbroken for 10,000 years has one knot in it, one place where it was cut and rejoined, and that the rejoining holds but was not guaranteed. This is the rule break that humanizes the avatar cycle more than any other. The cycle is not a natural law. It is not gravity. It is a spiritual institution maintained by the continuous and fragile existence of a series of mortal people. If any one of them fails to survive to the next natural death, the institution fails. The avatar cycle is as vulnerable as the human being who carries it, which means it is very vulnerable indeed. Aang's death and revival is the show telling you this, quietly and without dwelling on it, in the last moments of Book 2. It places the audience in the same position as Aang for all of Book 3, knowing that the cycle can break, knowing what breaking it would mean, And watching a 12-year-old boy carry that knowledge while also learning firebending and hiding in the Fire Nation and trying to figure out who he is when his arrows are covered and his robes are gone and nobody knows he is. The Avatar. He carries it lightly, which is the only way he knows how to carry things. Lightly and honestly and without pretending it does not weigh anything. This is the deepest rule of Aang's character. The rule that the show establishes and never breaks. He is always fully himself, even when the cycle is broken, even when the rules collapse, even in the finale when the past avatars tell him to be something else and the situation demands he be something else, and he looks at all of that and says, with the specific and simple honesty of someone who has never learned to be dishonest about himself, this is who I am. This is what I can do. Show me how to do it as myself, or accept that this is the only version of me you are getting. And the world eventually finds a way to accommodate him. Because it always does for the people who insist on being real. For the people who push past the rules not to escape them, but to find what the rules were always trying to protect. The blue fire and the blood and the metal and the lightning and the oldest art in the world were all, in the end, pointing at the same thing. Life. The life inside the element. The life inside the person. The life that the rules, at their best, were always trying to shelter and maintain and allow to flourish. That is what every rule break in this show was ultimately about. The rules said, here is the boundary of what is known. The exceptions said, here is the life that exists past the boundary of what is known. And the life, as always, was larger than any boundary drawn around it. Now rest. You have been in this world long enough tonight. It will be here tomorrow, and the day after, and every day you want to come back to it. The rules will be intact. The exceptions will be intact. The blue fire will burn cleanly until it does not, and the world will be exactly as large as it always was, which is larger than any map of it. Good night. Like this video if it helped you fall asleep, or even just feel something tonight. Subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next. And leave a comment below with the one rule break from this world that you think about the most, or the one you did not know about before tonight. I read every single one of them, and every single one of them matters. Sleep well.